The Obina family compound shimmered in late afternoon gold. Rappers swilled, beaded necklaces sparkled, and laughter rippled like water over smooth stones. But no one would remember the music. No one would remember the food. They would remember the slap. The engagement feast was grand. Long wooden tables sacked with bowls of pepper soup and mounds of steaming yam pottage. Elders in crimson Isiagu sat on carved stools. Young women in shimmering wrappers fanned themselves gently, and the air smelled of palm wine and roasted suya. In the center, seated with grace, was Zanel, with skin deep like polished mahogany and eyes that caught light like river stones. Her wrapper glowed indigo and bronze. Her beaded necklace shimmered against her smooth collarbone. She sat tall beside her fiancé, Obina, heir of Madame Nena's powerful lineage. But as Zenel softly corrected an elder on a marriage rite, her voice low, respectful, precise, Madame Nena rose sharply. Her coral bangles clinked, her wrapper rustled like dry leaves, and before anyone could blink, her palm sliced through the air and landed squarely on Zenel's cheek. A sharp, clean crack. The compound fell into silence so thick one could hear the fall of a kola nut. Madame Nena's chest heaved, her nostrils flared. You will not correct me in my own house, girl from nothing. She spat, voice cold as river stones. Her eyes burned with fury and pride, the pride of a woman who built empires and brooked no challenge, especially from a commoner's daughter. Zanel did not cry. Zanel did not shake. She sat still, her spine straight as the Iroko trunk, her hands folded calmly on her lap, her cheek warming under the sting, glowed red, but her eyes, dark, deep, ancient, met Madame Nena's glare without a flinch. The guests watched, frozen. Obina, her fiancé, lowered his eyes and said nothing. Gossip sparked silently on lips, but no one dared speak aloud. This was humiliation, a warning, a dismissal. Slowly, with grace untouched, Zanel lifted her chin slightly higher, her fingers curled around the edge of her wrapper. A small gesture, yet heavy as thunderclouds. A single thought echoed within her. They will remember me, and not as a girl they shamed. The birds took flight. The drums somewhere distant began a slow, steady beat. The fire had been lit. It was with this silent pride that Zanel grew. Beautiful, yes, but sharp as well. A mind caught lessons faster than most boys in the village school. She read, calculated, and debated elders gently yet firmly. And that is how Obina first noticed her. Obina, son of Madame Nena. Obina, the heir of the Obina family's sprawling lands and cocoa plantations. Obina with his father's jaw and his mother's ambition. He had returned from university in Enugu City, where his shirt smelled of foreign cologne and his accent cold slightly on English syllables. He saw Zanel in the market, haggling yam prices, her voice calm, her gaze unwavering, and by twilight he had found his way to her father's compound. Their courtship bloomed like bougainvillea in the harmattan, bright, unexpected, and nearly scandalous. The village buzzed. Zanel was born to Mazin Duka and Mama Ebile, farmers whose names were rarely sung at village gatherings. Their compound sat far from the bustling square, where red dust gathered thick and mango trees hunched low. Her father's yam farm was small, but tended with calloused devotion. Her mother wove mats from raffia, fingers nimble and precise, but the mats fetched little coin. In Umokwe, lineage was wealth, and Zanel's lineage was as thin as river mist. By the age of 10, Zanel understood that names opened doors long before mouths did. She saw how the sons of chiefs swaggered through the market, how the daughters of elders wore coral beads heavier than their necks could carry. She watched how women greeted Madame Nena with knees bent deeply and eyes averted, their voices sweetened with false honey. Zanel's own mother, Mama Ebile, never bent so low. Her pride was quiet but firm, like the unshifting roots of the Iroko. We may not have their gold, Mama Ebile would say softly, weaving under the midday sun, but our hands are clean, our backs are straight, and our word is weightier than brass. It was with this silent pride that Zanel grew. Beautiful, yes, but sharp as well. Her mind caught lessons faster than most boys in the village school. She read, calculated, and debated elders gently yet firmly. And that is how Obina first noticed her. Obina, son of Madam Nena. Obina, the heir of the Obina family's sprawling lands and cocoa plantations. Obina, with his father's jaw and his mother's ambition. He had returned from university in Enugu City, where his shirt smelled of foreign cologne and his accent curled slightly on English syllables. He saw Zanel in the market haggling yam prices, her voice calm, her gaze unwavering, and by twilight he had found his way to her father's compound. Their courtship bloomed like bougainvillea in the harmattan, bright, unexpected, and nearly scandalous. The village buzzed. How could Obina, son of the mighty, lower himself for a farmer's daughter? Women whispered behind wrappers. Elders shook their heads slowly. And above them all, Madame Nena boiled quietly. She had envisioned her son marrying the daughter of Chief Agu, a union of power, titles, and unending land. Instead, he brought Zenel, a girl with no lineage worth song, a girl whose fingernails bore the soft grime of farm soil, a girl whose mother still walked barefoot to the stream. Madame Nena's disapproval came like a slow, steady drizzle, soft at first, then unrelenting. She invited Zanel to family dinners, only to serve her last. She corrected her in front of elders, nitpicking how her wrapper sat or how her greetings landed. When Zanel brought hand-woven mats as gifts, Madame Nena's lips curled soothly, dismissing them as village handiwork, but Zanel never flinched. With each subtle cut, she responded with patience, poise, and soft-spoken dignity. This quiet strength only deepened Obina's affection, but it hardened Madame Nena's resolve. If whispers and dismissals could not crack Zanel, perhaps public shame would. And so, on the day of the engagement feast, with all of Umokwe watching, chiefs, elders, women of prestige, Madame Nena struck. Her palm, wide and practiced, landed with precise force, not just to wound Zanel's cheek, but to fracture her spirit before witnesses. In Umuokwe, public shame was not just a slap, it was a branding. It was a stamp that echoed louder than words. A woman who accepts a slap at her betrothal feast is not fit to wed the son of kings. The compound had fallen silent. The slap was not just personal, it was political. It reminded everyone that Madame Nena still held the keys to the Obina family gates, and surely no woman from humble soil would dare walk through them after such disgrace. And so, while her fiancé dropped his gaze and the guests whispered, Zanel's mind did not scatter. The thoughts crystallized, cool and clear as stream water. If they meant to break her, they had only built the firewood for something greater. After the slap, Zanel did not weep. She did not flee the compound or curse the heavens as some had expected. She stood quietly, adjusting her wrapper with calm fingers, and bowed slightly to Madame Nenene, the same woman whose palm still tingled with the sting of pride. Then Zenel walked away, barefoot on the red soil, her spine straight as a staff. The next weeks bled into months. Whispers bloomed and died like dust devils across Umwokwi. She will not recover from such disgrace, they said. No man will take her now, they concluded. And Obine, his love once bold as a cock's crow, dimmed into silence. Under his mother's iron gaze and under the weight of family legacy, he folded like wet cloth. He stopped visiting. He stopped writing. He stopped defending. Zenel returned to the soil that had always embraced her father's farm and her mother's raffia mats. By dawn, her hands were deep in yam ridges. By dusk, her fingers danced across weaving frames. In her silence, she gathered strength, not the loud, chest beating strength of men, but the deep rooted resilience of a woman whose dignity had survived fire. For 3 years, Zanel built, first in small ways. She began trading mats not just within Umuokwe, but in surrounding villages, Ogboko, Newi, and even as far as Onitsha. Her designs grew intricate, blending traditional patterns with new daring styles inspired by her childhood dreams. Her mother's old loom, once dusty and slow, sang daily with vibrant raffia strands, and slowly coins multiplied in the clay pot beneath her bed. But coins were not her only harvest. She listened carefully during her travels to market women, palm wine tappers, cocoa traders. She learned trade routes, demand cycles, and bartering tricks. Soon she did not only weave mats, she began buying from other artisans and reselling in bulk to city merchants. By the second year, whispers changed tones. That cow, Zenel, her goods now reached Enugu market. I heard her mats were presented at the governor's festival. Yet through all her quiet rise, she remained humble. She wore the same simple wrappers. She greeted elders with respect. She never spoke of the slaps, not once. A woman of pedigree, Adaura, daughter of Chief Agu. The wedding was grand, with drummers from distant clans and dancers whose ankles jingled with brass bells. But the marriage, as village gossips soon reported, was cold. Adaura, spoiled and sharp-tongued, clashed with Madame Nena, Ibina, sandwiched between two iron wheels, withered quietly. It was said his laughter, once bright as sunrise, faded into mutters. Madame Nena, Elan's faced troubles. Heavy rains drowned their cocoa crops. A land dispute swallowed part of her estate in Nogboko, and her once thriving market stalls in Newi slowly dwindled under poor management. Yet still, Zanel remained distant and silent. No word of mockery passed her lips. Her eyes held no gloating spark. She simply walked. By the third year, she no longer merely traded mats. She had expanded into cloth, clay pots, and spices. Her business name, Ugo Zanele, Zanel's Eagle, carried weight across counties. One evening, under the full moon's glow, her mother sat beside her as they sorted woven mats. Mama Ebele, lines of wisdom deepening her dark face, smiled gently. You carry scars well, my daughter, she said quietly. A woman who knows how to knead suffering into strength can never be poor. Zanel only smiled, her fingers continuing their steady work. Inside her chest, her heart beat calmly, steady, deep, unshaken. Zanel's return to power did not start with fanfare. It began, like most quiet storms, in silence. While others boasted about wealth, she moved strategically, like the river bird that does not sing while building its nest. After her first appearance at the Women's Trade Summit in Enugu, doors that had once slammed shut before her opened softly on oil hinges. Powerful women, commissioners, permanent secretaries, wives of governors found her dignity magnetic. She spoke little, But when she did, her words landed with weight and grace. Soon, Zanel was awarded grants to scale rural women's artisan cooperatives. With those funds, she established training centers in 3 villages, teaching raffia weaving, pottery, and cloth dyeing. Hundreds of rural women, widows, single mothers, and outcast daughters flocked to her workshops. She paid them fairly. She treated them kindly. In return, they pledged her loyalty. By the 4th year, Ugo Zanele Limited was no longer a humble artisan shop. It had become a nationwide cooperative, empowering women across 5 states. As her network expanded, so did her influence. Politicians began consulting her on women's economic issues. Traditional rulers invited her to palace councils, a rare honor for a woman of her standing. Even bank managers, who once scoffed at the raffia mats, now visited her with proposal letters and branded diaries. Yet, despite all this, Zanel remained rooted. She never forgot the taste of humiliation nor the quiet ache of betrayal. She did not chase revenge openly. She prepared. While Obina's family lands dwindled and Madame Nena's influence faded under debts, Zanel began acquiring properties quietly. First, a stretch of farmland next to Madame Nena's cocoa groves. Then, 3 stores in Niue Market, previously owned by distant relatives of the Nena clan. By the 5th year, she had bought half the land that once belonged to the same family that discarded her, but her hand wasn't on. She never gloated. These were signed discreetly. Landowners praised her for paying fair prices and for not chasing away tenants. Even village elders began whispering her name with respect. Meanwhile, Obina's marriage crumbled. Adaora's sharp tongue and Madame Nena's rigid pride clashed daily. By the 6th year, Adaora had packed her bags and returned to her father's mansion in Oka. Obina, hollow-eyed and weary, wandered through his compound like a man haunted by ghosts. Madame Nena's debts mounted. Court cases over land disputes drained her strength and coin. The once feared matriarch, whose eyes once silenced a crowd, now sat alone beneath the Udala tree, a wrapper's faded and voice soft. Then, a twist no one foresaw. One of Zenel's women cooperatives in Ogboko won a national contract to supply raffia and dyed cloth for the Presidential Cultural Expo in Abuja. The contract, worth millions, catapulted her into the top ranks of businesswomen in the country. Media outlets flocked to interview her. Magazines printed her photos, graceful, poised, her smile quiet but confident. During one televised interview, the reporter asked her, Zanel, you are now one of the most powerful trade leaders in southeastern Nigeria. To what do you owe your success? She smiled gently, her eyes steady. I owe it to the lessons of humility, hard work, and the importance of never forgetting one's roots. She did not mention the slap. She did not mention Obina, but those who knew understood. Meanwhile, back in Umwokwe, a petition's office, Madame Niena's remaining lands faced repossession due to unpaid loans. With no one to defend her in court and no money to appeal, her compound teetered on collapse. But before the gavel fell, a mysterious benefactor cleared the debts. The village elders gathered, confused. It was Zanel. Quietly, without fanfare, she paid off Madame Nena's outstanding debts. Info. Word spread like wildfire. The same daughter they cast aside had now become their savior. By the 7th year, a letter arrived at Madame Nena's compound. It was an invitation. Zenel was hosting a grand reunion for all families of Umwokwe in her newly built estate that sat proudly on the same soil where she once wove mats. Madame Nene sat frozen, the wax seal broken, her hand trembling. Obina, older and paler, said nothing. He merely swallowed hard and nodded slowly. Zanel had returned, not with bitterness, but with power draped in velvet. The sun rose brilliant and bold over Umuokwe that day, gilding the red earth and sparkling on the newly plastered compound that now bore a gilded sign, Zanel Estate, home of the women's renaissance. For weeks, messengers had crossed rivers and climbed hills, delivering handwritten invitations, sealed in gold wax, each bearing Zenel's crest, two intertwined raffia palms encircling a mat. It was the first grand reunion of all extended families of Umuokwe in nearly 50 years, and the host, the girl they had mocked, shamed, and discarded. On the day of the gathering, the village square bustled. Rows of white canopies shimmered in the sun. Caterers served trays of jollof rice, bitter leaf soup, and goat meat. Drummers warmed their leather skins. Flutists tested high-pitched tunes, and women wrapped in vibrant jute wrappers swayed under gilt-edged scarves of gold and emerald. Luxury SUVs lined the dusty roads, a sign that important people had come. And then Zanel arrived, not hidden, not timid, but standing tall, wrapped in an intricate indigo and gold woven george, her hair in a regal updo threaded with beads. Her jewelry glimmered, not gaudy but ancestral, inherited from generations of powerful matriarchs. Her steps echoed softly, escorted by 6 women dressed in matching wrappers, the executive council of the Women's Cooperative. As she entered the square, conversations halted. Chatter faded to whispers. Heads turned. Even the elders rose from their stools, adjusting faded Isiagu tops nervously. Then they saw her walk towards Madame Nena and Obina. The once feared matriarch now looked small, a wrapper loose on her shoulders, eyes dimmed by years of loss and pride swallowed raw. For a breathless moment, no one moved. And then, to the astonishment of all, Zanel bent slightly and greeted Madame Nena with both palms on the ground, a deep sign of respect given publicly, witnessed by all. Narrator, soft and slow. To bow when you can crush, that is the mark of true royalty. Good afternoon, Mama, Zanel said, voice calm as still water. I am honored you accepted my invitation. Madame Nena blinked, her throat bobbing. Her lips parted, but no words came. Her fingers trembled as she clutched her faded scarf. Obina, standing behind her, lowered his gaze, his breath shallow. His shoulders, once proud and broad, sagged. Zanel straightened, smiled gently, and motioned her aides to guide Madame Nena and Obina to seats of honor, shaded under carved umbrellas. As the ceremony began, the village elders spoke first, praising Zanel for her generosity in uniting the fractured clans. One by one, speakers rose to recount her achievements, how a women's cooperative had brought dignity to widows, how a schools lifted poor daughters into artisans, how a quiet philanthropy healed bitterland disputes. And then, mid-ceremony, the waiter approached, a tall young man in crisp white attire and a red cap bent beside Madame Nena's seat, and with a deep bow, asked clearly, Madame Ona, shall I serve you palm wine now? The title Madame Ona was no accident. It was a public acknowledgement that Zanel now owned not just the estate, but much of the lands and businesses that once made Madame Nena's family powerful. A ripple spread through the crowd. Eyebrows rose. Whispers flew like harmattan dust. Madame Nena froze. Her fingers twitched. Her lips quivered as she lowered her eyes into the calabash in her lap. But Zanel, poised warm, unshaken, simply nodded gracefully. She took the calabash from the waiter, turned to Madame Nena herself, and said in a voice rich with meaning, Mama, please have the first drink. In our tradition, the eldest mother blesses the gathering first. Madame Nena's throat tightened. A tear slipped down her weathered cheek. With trembling hands, she accepted the calabash and drank. As twilight fell, elders toasted her name. Women sang her praises. Children danced to drums that echoed across red hills. And throughout the evening, Obina sat still, his gaze fixed on the woman who once begged to be accepted, who now ruled with grace so deep it silenced even the bitterest tongues. By nightfall, every household knew this truth. Zanel's power was not just in lands or wealth. Her power was in her ability to forgive without forgetting, to lead without loading, and to elevate without boasting. For in Umuokwe, they would speak for generations of the woman who was slapped before guests, but whose name in the end was carved in the heart of the whole country. The sky of Umuokwe darkened into twilight, streaked with purple and copper as lanterns flickered alive around the square. Laughter rose and drums softened into steady heartbeats. The reunion feast stretched into the evening, yet still all eyes solidly watched Zanel. Madame Nena sat silent, her hands clasped in her lap, Obina unmoving beside her like a carved statue of regret, and in the center of it all stood Zanel, as calm as an ancestral spirit walking among the living. When the elders called for the final blessing, it was tradition for the most respected elder to rise and offer closing prayers. But this time, Elder Okonkwo, his beard now white and his voice cracked from age, stood slowly and lifted a gnarled staff. He turned deliberately to Zanel. Zanel, daughter of Umuokwe, you have gathered your people with open hands and healed old wounds with soft words. But there is something greater than wealth and generosity that must be known this day. He beckoned her forward. With graceful strides, Zanel approached and knelt before him. The council of Umuokwe acknowledges the truth long hidden. In the years of your suffering, you did not curse us. You built empires beyond these rivers. And many do not know that you are not just Zanel of Umuokwe. You are Zanel Nwanibuife, founder and sole benefactor of the National Women's Renaissance Fund. A stunned gasp swept across the square. For years, across the country, stories had swirled about a mysterious woman who had quietly funded thousands of women's enterprises, farms, fashion houses, schools, and medical clinics, lifting entire villages from poverty without ever seeking fame. No one knew her face. Until now, Elder Okonkwo smiled faintly and continued. With your hands, over 500 widows reclaimed land stolen from them. With your coin, over 3,000 girls were educated. And with your influence, laws were rewritten to protect women silenced for generations. He lifted his staff high, and the crowd rose to their feet, stunned. Madame Nena's lips parted in shock. Her throat quivered. Her gaze flickered to her son, Obina, whose face had gone pale, sweat dotting his brow. And then Elder Okonkwo placed the staff into Zanel's hands. By the authority of the elders and the consent of the people gathered here, we proclaim you, Ojene Nwanibuife, voice and protector of women of Umuokwe. A booming cheer erupted. Drums pounded, flutes wailed, women ululated, their cries rising into the sky like wings. But Zanel, unshaken, stood slowly, her eyes clear and soft. She turned gracefully to the gathering and raised the staff high. When she spoke, her voice rippled through the square like warm honey. I accept this honor not for myself alone, but for every woman who has been silenced, struck, or shamed, and yet still rose again. My power is the power of we, not me. She turned her gaze directly to Madame Nena, locking eyes across the square. Mama Nena. You once told me I had nothing to offer your family because I was a poor village girl. You were wrong. I had dignity, and dignity is wealth that cannot be spent. Today, I return not to mock you, but to show you that women's worth is not measured by bride price or family name, but by the lives we uplift. Madame Nena's jaw trembled, her once proud shoulders sagged. With a soft, shaky motion, she rose slowly from her chair, walked across the square, and knelt before Zenel. Tears streaked Nena's face. Her lips quivered as she touched Zenel's feet. Madame Nena, hoarse whisper, I wronged you. I see now. Forgive me. Zenel bent swiftly and lifted the old woman into her arms. Mama, I forgave you long ago. The crowd erupted in cheers, louder this time. Women rushed forward, elders clapped their staffs, and young girls sang songs that would later be woven into village folklore. That evening, fires burned into the night, and storytellers began to chant the tale of Zenelin Wanyibwif, the girl who was slapped before guests, who rose in silent strength, and who returned not to destroy, but to reign with kindness sharper than any sword. For in Umokwe, they would speak for generations of the woman who was slapped before guests, but whose name in the end was carved in the heart of the whole country. The sky of Umokwe darkened into twilight, streaked with purple and copper as lanterns flickered alive around the square. Laughter rose and drums softened into steady heartbeats. The reunion feast stretched into the evening, yet still all eyes subtly watched Zanel. Madame Nena sat silent, her hands clasped in her lap, Obina unmoving beside her like a carved statue of regret, and in the center of it all stood Zanel, as calm as an ancestral spirit walking among the living. When the elders called for the final blessing, it was tradition for the most respected elder to rise and offer closing prayers. But this time, Elder Okonkwo, his beard now white and his voice cracked from age, stood slowly and lifted a gnarled staff. He turned deliberately to Zanel. Zanel, daughter of Umokwe, you have gathered your people with open hands and healed old wounds with soft words. But there is something greater than wealth and generosity that must be known this day. He beckoned her forward. With graceful strides, Zanel approached and knelt before him. The council of Umuokwe acknowledges the truth long hidden. In the years of your suffering, you did not curse us. You built empires beyond these rivers. And many do not know that you are not just Zanel of Umuokwe. You are Zanel Nwanyibuife, founder and sole benefactor of the National Women's Renaissance Fund. A stunned gasp swept across the square. For years across the country, stories had swirled about a mysterious woman who had quietly funded thousands of women's enterprises, farms, fashion houses, schools, and medical clinics, lifting entire villages from poverty without ever seeking fame. No one knew her face until now. Elder Okonkwo smiled faintly and continued. With your hands, over 500 widows reclaimed land stolen from them. With your coin, over 3,000 girls were educated. And with your influence, laws were rewritten to protect women's silence for generations. He lifted his staff high, and the crowd rose to their feet, stunned. Madame Nena's lips parted in shock. Her throat quivered. Her gaze flickered to her son, Obina, whose face had gone pale, sweat dotting his brow. And then Elder Okonkwo placed the staff into Zanel's hands. By the authority of the elders and the consent of the people gathered here, we proclaim you, Ojen Nwanyibuifa, voice and protector of women of Umwokwe. A booming cheer erupted, drums pounded, flutes wailed, women ululated, their cries rising into the sky like wings. But Zanel, unshaken, stood slowly, her eyes clear and soft. She turned gracefully to the gathering and raised the staff high. When she spoke, a voice rippled through the square like warm honey. I accept this honor not for myself alone, but for every woman who has been silenced, struck, or shamed, and yet still rose again. My power is the power of we, not me. She turned her gaze directly to Madame Nena, locking eyes across the square. Mama Ninena, you once told me I had nothing to offer your family because I was a poor village girl. You are wrong. I had dignity, and dignity is wealth that cannot be spent. Today, I return not to mock you, but to show you that women's worth is not measured by bride price or family name, but by the lives we uplift. Madame Nena's jaw trembled. Her once proud shoulders sagged. With a soft, shaky motion, she rose slowly from her chair, walked across the square, and knelt before Zenel. Tears streaked Nena's face. Her lips quivered as she touched Zenel's feet. Madame Nena, hoarse whisper, I wronged you. I see now. Forgive me. Zenel bent swiftly and lifted the old woman into her arms. Mama, I forgave you long ago. The crowd erupted in cheers, louder this time. Women rushed forward, elders clapped their staffs, and young girls sang songs that would later be woven into village folklore. That evening, fires burned into the night, and storytellers began to chant the tale of Zanel Nwanibuife, the girl who was slapped before guests, who rose in silent strength, and who returned not to destroy, but to reign with kindness sharper than any sword. The dawn broke softly over Umwokwe the next day, gilding the red earth and the thatched rooftops with quiet gold. Birds flitted between tall palm trees and the village square, where drums and cheers had thundered just hours before, now shimmered with peace. Zanel rose early as she always did, her steps measured and light. The staff of honor, carved with ancient patterns, rested against the doorway of her ancestral compound. No guards, no gates, no grand mansions surrounded her. She remained as simple in manner as she was years before. But now, the entire land whispered her name with reverence. Children ran barefoot past her courtyard, giggling. Women carrying water pots greeted her with soft boos. Young men nodded respectfully as they led their goats to pasture. That morning, Madame Nena arrived at our compound, this time alone and without her usual entourage of proud relatives. Her wrapper was simple, her head bowed. In her hands, she carried a small carved calabash, an ancient symbol of apology and peace. Zanel met her at the gate. Madame Nena, soft voice, I have not come as a mother-in-law. I have come as a woman seeking to mend what I broke. Without hesitation, Zanel reached out and clasped the old woman's hands, a smile gentle. Zanel warmly, Mama, the river does not hold grudges against the stone that blocked it. It simply flows around and nourishes still. Word spread quickly that morning. In African custom, such a public reconciliation carried deep meaning. Within hours, the village square filled once more, not for dispute or boasting, but to witness unity. Obina, her former fiancé, approached too, shoulders heavier, eyes dimmed by regret. He bowed deeply, his breath shaky. Obina, low voice. Zanel, I was blind. Your dignity has taught me what manhood is. Forgive me. Zanel, ever graceful, nodded. Zanel, steady. Obina, life's journey has taught us both. Go in peace. My path is no longer beside you, but ahead of us all. The elders, pleased by the public mending of hearts, proclaimed a festival of unity, a new village tradition in honor of Zanel's actions. It would be held every harvest season to remind generations of the power of forgiveness and resilience. Over the next months, Zanel's story spread across the country like dry harmattan wind lifting leaves. Villages where women had been silenced invited her as a guest of honor. Cities where laws had failed, women named councils and funds after her. Young girls, once afraid to dream, chanted her name in folk songs, their voices bright and unashamed. Years later, when Zanel finally grew old, her legacy had already taken root deep into the soil. The National Women's Renaissance Fund thrived under her successors. The Festival of Unity became a grand event, attracting leaders and travelers from distant lands. Her name, Ogene Nwanyibuife, became synonymous with dignity, silent strength, and unshakable grace. Her story was passed down as folklore, sung by griots beside fires, and etched in the hearts of all who dared to rise after falling. Because Zenel showed the world is not how hard they strike you that matters. It is how deeply you stand after the dust clears.